Here we go. Lesson chapter 8 and the seventh commandment. And the seventh commandment is just 5 simple words. Do not commit adultery. It's going to be one of those awkward talks. And it's because I'm taking it slightly away from the adultery that we all think of. Because for the most of us, that is not an issue. We have made a commitment and we're going to stay by our commitment. And by that definition, if you are married, adultery is having a sexual experience with someone else that you are not married to. So most of us are going to say, okay, I've made my commitment and it's not something I'm going to even engage. And yet, what we're going to talk about is the fact that who we are married to is an investment. How do we protect our investment? Actually, how do we protect any investment that is precious? And our marriages are investments. They are precious. But then we're going to talk about a couple other things that we can fall in line with, such as adultering with objects, such as spending more time with an object, with something we love, and not spending time with the one we've committed to. Or spiritual adultery, which is spending more time with something rather than spending it with God. And we'll get to that a little bit later. What good are fences? Now think about it. When I grew up on the farm, and fences were extremely important because they kept some things in and they kept some things out. So when we were kids, we had this thought that electric fence was going to protect us. And so we would stand on the other side of the electric fence and tease the bull, not realizing that that electric fence is not going to stop a bull. But in our minds, electric fence was up, it was plugged in, it was going, it was good for a lot of things. We had a fence when the kids were little around our, on the other side of the house, and we lived very, 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 very close to the road. So that fence gave me comfort knowing, okay, the kids are going to have to really work to get out of it, and by that time I would know. So it gave me a security that my kids would be safe, stay in the back side of the house instead of going down in the front side of the house where the road was. We used to have a lot of animals here, and we had fences in all over the farm, and the fences were to keep the horses in, not necessarily to keep anything out, but to keep them in so they were protected, so we didn't have to go chasing them down the road when we wanted to ride them. They were good for a lot of things. It also was protection. So when the kids were riding in the big arenas, those fences kept the kids riding in the big arenas and not taking off down the waterways where we'd have to go find them. So there's a lot of value in fences. And there's a lot of kinds of fences. We have picket fences, little tiny garden fences. We have chain link fences. We have privacy fences. And sometimes we hide behind those privacy fences in our culture rather than get to know our neighbors. So to start out with, gifts are to be appreciated, treasured, and protected. How do we care for something that's priceless? If there was a fire, back in the day, everybody say, if there's a fire, what are the things you would grab before you go out the door? If in a cognitive, calm setting, I could tell you exactly the 4 things I would grab. But now if there was a fire, I'm not sure those same things would be what I would grab as I went out the door. I always said I would grab my car keys, grab my billfold, make sure the kids were out, obviously. But we protect things that we think are priceless. So Proverbs 19:14 says, houses and wealth are inherited from parents, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Now that's just, we're on the end of Grandpa passing away, and so there is some things that have been shared with us that is a great inheritance, and we're thrilled. I don't know about thrilled, but it's fun to see the value of things that we are gifted with, that we can bless other people. That's an inheritance. I never thought of it as being, my husband or maybe Jim, his wife, was an inheritance from God. It's a wealth. It's a blessing. And we can get money and things from people. But someone that is an investment that is special to us, that we've committed to, that comes from God. So how does that change the way we look at who we're married to or who we value? Because we can kind of apply the same thing to relationships in many, many ways. So when one commits adultery, when one changes the covenant that one has and puts attention on something else, it changes that gift, that investment, that blessing to a possession, and a possession that we don't care about. To consider your spouse as an investment and precious, and then you throw that away by going and spending time and investing in someone else, that means that one first gift, you really didn't care about it, wasn't important. And that breaks the covenant that we have with God when we make a covenant with other people, when we marry. So if we're going to define adultery, it also threatens the integrity of leaders. Because think about it, if one is not faithful to its spouse, how would we expect them to be trusted with other things such as our nation, our government, our money, making laws that are going to be what's best for us? If their integrity isn't there, how do we know that they're going to be faithful to us if they aren't faithful to the ones they made a promise to? And by doing that, it also threatens economic stability. And if you think about it in a family, it changes things a lot when a husband is not faithful to a wife, and then suddenly now we have families that are splitting up, and a mom has to go to work to provide for her children, and the father is off somewhere else. But it also is it's a big trust issue. When you destroy trust with someone, then it changes. It changes everything. When you can't trust another person, it's an integrity thing. And when someone adultercizes, I don't know if that's a word, when they take the commitment and the vows they made for one thing and just flippantly leave it for something else, that's hard to process. So, Old Testament adultery was punishable by death, and there's so many things in the Old Testament that we don't kind of get, but God was upset with it. God wanted it to stop. Women weren't treated right. This was an attempt to get the women a little more than just being thrown out to the curb. But in the New Testament, Jesus changes things. He changes it. It's forgivable, but it's also deepened. So it's not just that adultery is forgivable, but he changes the way you look at adultery from the fact that it's not just an act. Now it starts in the heart, and we need to change the heart, which will then change the outside. And even if you don't commit adultery the way everyone else thinks it should be or it is, suddenly, now it's in the heart, which we can't see. And so Jesus is saying, there's a big difference here, and I want you to see what the difference makes. So in Matthew 5:28, he says, "But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart." And Matthew 5:32, of course, he says, "But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her a victim of adultery. And then anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." But if we go to Galatians 5:19 through 21, there's a lot of do nots in the Bible. And it's kind of like the do not enter sign. There's something about a do not enter sign that kind of makes me want to find out why. And Jesus isn't putting up do not enter signs in our lives to intrigue us. He's putting do not enter signs up to protect us. So Galatians 5:19 through 21 says, "The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, debauchery, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy, drunkenness, orgies, and the like. And I warn you, as I did before, those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God." So if we go backwards in this, and we go backwards and say, someone who does certain things will not commit adultery because it changes your focus. So go backwards. Someone who is not drunk, who doesn't choose to drink, has a better chance of making cognitive decisions that are on the moral side because you have your wits about you. Someone who doesn't envy will be satisfied and thankful God has given them someone to love and a commitment to share, instead of looking around and wishing they had something else. Someone who is selfless, instead of having a selfish ambition, will look at the needs of other people. Therefore, adultery would not be considered because it is hurting other people. fits of rage and jealousy. If we are content with where we are, what God has done for us, who He has given us, and how we can love that person, we're not going to be jealous. We're not going to be angry. And so if you kind of go backwards, you see that someone who is an adulterer would not choose those actions if they lived by the fruits of the Spirit and if they had a godly mindset. So the New Testament truly really focuses on changing the heart. And it's also not just changing the heart, but there's something about putting up a fence to protect what your investment is. So the investment isn't just your marriage or your wife, it's your children, because we know that as there's some kind of research, and I don't remember now where I read it, but there's a large percentage of divorces that just got divorced. And the trust issue is just there because there wasn't trust broken. The kids get along better with both parents. They accept the divorce in a different level. But if one of the parents are unfaithful and then they become divorced, the trust level between the children and the unfaithful parent is very hard to reestablish. So adultery, which leads to all sorts of family issues, breaks up the trust between the family. So fences help keep our hearts protected. Fences are outward behavior changing. Now, we use fences, and we talked about this, to keep things in or keep things out. And spiritually, we have fences that protect things that are important to our heart. If we have a fence up, we are not going to go outside the fences if the fence is there and we have it to protect us. It's kind of like our filters. So the church and the home are two things that God did to reflect His love on earth. And if we have homes that are split up and angry and full of mistrust and hate, that doesn't show who God is on earth. So one of the beautiful blessings of our homes are to show God's character. And God's character, as we talk about the Ten Commandments, it shows who God's character is. He is not going to break trust. He is going to stay with His covenant, which is the opposite of do not commit adultery. Do not go back on your covenant that you have made. So if you think about it, the fences we put up around our lives include more than just protecting our marriages. They protect our heart. So how do we put a fence around our heart with our telephone conversations so that they are honoring whoever hears them? How are we putting fences around the relationships we treasure? How are we investing in them to where there's something that we protect at all costs? What do you watch? What do you listen to? The fences that we put up, our investment is who we are. As a child of God and as a Christian, we want to keep the investment, our faith, pure. We want to be a person of integrity. We want to live so that others see God in us. How are we going to protect that? Well, it's putting a fence around your property, and for everybody it's going to be different. Certain places I go and certain places I don't go. Certain things I listen to, certain things I don't listen to. That is the protection around what we feel very strongly about, that is our commitment, our consecration, our vows. So spiritual adultery. Let me back up a bit. One of the sermons I listened to talked about was the adultery of an object. And he talked specifically about loving something so much that it takes away from our family, from our loved ones, from our investment, our marriage. And what he cited was he loved motorcycles, and he loved motorcycle racing. And he said, I wasn't forsaking my family. I drug them to all the races. But the racing was more important than them. And I think we see it today in our world with sports. We see it with things that people put in front of their marriage. A lot of times it's work. And I think pastors especially have to be careful that their church does not become more important than their marriage. That their church, they don't spend more time at church than they play at home playing ball with their kids. Your family, your investment, your covenant you've made is the second most important thing to your faith in God. So even good things can really get in the way of our covenant relationships when they take over and are treated with more importance and a higher degree of time, money, sacrifice than the one we made a covenant with, or our relationship with God. And that brings us to spiritual adultery. So being unfaithful to one's belief in God's by allowing other things, whether they're worldly, whether they're really good, or whether they're bad, that's not as important as the fact that they lower our devotion to God. It's a spiritual adultery. We are spending more time with that and focusing on that than we do on our faith walk, on the things that make our covenant with God stronger. So worshiping anything in place of God, and that goes back to the second commandment. Don't have any other idols before me. And so for many, it's an idol of self. I want what makes me happy. I want what makes me feel important. I want what makes me feel good. And if my covenant relationship with God isn't doing that, I'm going to find another object to pay attention to. So, in essence, I think I'm going to break it down to, I think adultery is the sin of prioritizing things over people. So if we are going to prioritize our commitment, our vow that we've made, the covenant that we've made, we prioritize that covenant. And that's important. But when we have other things that get in the way, that's the sin of adultery in that instance. And it can be believing more will be better. If I have more of this, if I have more of that, if I spend more time here, and if I do more of this, I'll be happy. Your happiness isn't what makes your covenant strong. It's a commitment. And the commitment to the covenant, you will find joy in that because you're carrying out what you promised to do. And another thing is seeking worth through others rather than God. Adultery is taking something else and hoping to find value in that, or happiness in that, worth in your heart in that, rather than God will give me my value, God will give me my worth, God will give me my peace and my joy, and that is not conditional on my happiness. So if we were to rephrase spiritual unfaithfulness or spiritual adultery, how would we find it, how would we put it in a positive light? So let me rephrase that. If we were to take do not commit adultery and turn it into a positive, how would we rephrase that? So it's a commitment and it's a action we are going to take. So perhaps it would be something along the fact, treasure what I commit to. Treasure the investment in my marriage. Every day find a way to find the joy in where God has placed me. And that removes then my need to find another object to have my joy. It also removes the pressure on me looking to other people for my joy and my pleasure, because I am finding the value of where God has placed me, the beauty of where God has placed me every day. And because I treasure the covenant I made with Him and the person I love, the relationships I have, I will put Him first, and then I will honor others. In the New Testament it says that love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And sometimes we love the Lord the God with all our heart, soul, and strength, and then we just love ourselves and we don't love our neighbor. And loving our neighbor means respecting our neighbor, paying attention to what our neighbor's needs are and what their needs are not. And if something we are doing is offensive to a neighbor, we stop doing it. If something that our neighbor has that we could help them, we help them. It goes back to how can I bless other people, and what somebody else needs that I can provide? How can I help someone else be strong in their covenant? How can I help someone else avoid temptations that I know they struggle with? How can I help someone else keep their marriage strong? How can I encourage young married women? You know, when you've been married a while, you find out that, number one, they're not going to change. And when you're young and you get married, okay, everything will be fine, we'll work it all out, he'll do exactly what I want. And I don't really mean that. But sometimes we believe that. And as you get older, you realize, God gives us people in our lives to change us on the inside, not for us to change them. And we look at the culture around us, and, adultery is treated now as almost an accepted thing. It's kind of interesting. When you look in the Bible and you see the effects of adultery, I mean, we look in our culture, we see it, but we look in the Bible, we see it. So think about David and Bathsheba. That instance that he chose to act upon changed the rest of his life. He struggled forever with Absalom, his son. And that was a direct result of his adultery. There was betrayal, there was family breakdown, there was mental health issues, there was trust issues. And oftentimes children repeat the sins of their father, and we see that in David's life. I also saw something else that was kind of interesting. It said the first time is considered a mistake. And I would agree with that, although I think we have choices, we choose. The second one is a decision. The second time it's a decision of what you're choosing to do. And the third time it becomes a culture. It just is what we do. And that has some merit to it. Because if it happens once and you choose never to go back again, that's a choice. So in our hearts, where sin starts, we can make choices to not repeat mistakes, but we can also put up fences to help us never make that first mistake. Our culture has become a culture of compromise, and it's okay. Everybody does it. It's really just not important because it's a pass around the plate, take what you want. Well, God created purity for a reason. It's a beautiful reason. And when everything's used, it's not as precious. And young people, when they heard an illustration where you're given a rose when you're born, and as you grow older, everyone you have an encounter with gets a petal of your rose. And then you come to be married, and all you have left is a stem and a thorn. And those kind of marriages don't work. So keep your rose. Don't be passing out the petals to everybody just because. Choose to make a commitment. And then I think as older people, supposed to be wiser, we can really encourage younger people that there is a reason for purity, and there's a beauty in choosing the right person to be married to, and who you're going to make a vow with, and who you're going to make a covenant with. And then you help young people continue to hold that covenant as precious and as beautiful. But I think the biggest thing is what adultery does is it doesn't just sin against the person or the people involved. It sins against God, and that's probably the thing that hurts us most of all, is that we sin against God. So when we look at this topic, which is awkward and crazy, how can I protect what my investment is? I value my investment. A lot of us have safes. A lot of us, take things valuable to the bank and put it in a vault. No, you're not going to take your husband and put him in a vault, although that would be interesting. But our relationships need to be protected, and we need to help each other protect them. And whatever that means for you, it's different for everybody. But if we value, and it goes back to that Proverbs, a prudent wife, a godly husband is from God. It's a gift from God, and gifts from God are priceless and are to be protected, just like investments. We really keep an eye on our investments if we're in financial things. We check on them, we make sure we're getting interest. It's the same thing as an investment on the spiritual side. Know where your investments are. Know where the people are that have your back. Know the people that are going to keep you accountable. And consistently remind yourself of the covenant you made with God and how important that is. Because it's not simply just the relationship that you have with your spouse that you're protecting. It's the covenant you've made with God. So think about it. How can I wake up each morning and not just say, don't commit adultery, but how can I live to value my relationship and my investment that I have made with my marriage, with my friendships, with my faith? Have a good one.